Hi, everybody. My name is Derek Babb, and I'm a board member of ModeShift Omaha.
And I'm Sarah Johnson, the new membership and volunteer coordinator of ModeShift Omaha.
And this presentation is designed for people running for city government in Omaha, Nebraska, or people that want to be more engaged with their elected officials in and around Omaha. So, ModeShift Omaha is an advocacy group that works for transportation equity, basically giving people the option of choosing how they get around the city without being constrained to only using a car, especially in cases where using a car is not an option. Our vision is that people can get around the city no matter what their situation is, that they don't need to rely on automobiles all of the time, that the public transportation should be safe and efficient, that they should have options like biking and busing and walking for many of their everyday purposes. And that really is part of a high quality of life that we can see Omaha achieving. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about a number of different things that relate to our mission and what we think that elected officials in Omaha can do. First up, we want to talk about housing, which isn't technically part of transportation, but it does drive a lot of the feasibility around transportation. So one of the big things that we see is the need for more infill. This is because it's a lot cheaper to build where there already is infrastructure like roads and sewer and water, rather than building in new greenfield development on the edge of town. That also leads to an unsustainable pattern of development that is hard to get buses to. It's hard to build bike networks around, and it's hard to build a walkable community if we build further and further out of the city. So anytime you see somebody building a new greenfield design or a greenfield, in an old farm field, they're building new infrastructure, new sewer, new water. They're increasing the amount of area that the police and the fire and the school districts have to cover. Um, and this horizontal expansion that we've seen in Omaha over and over really is difficult to maintain in the long run. There's lots of studies that show that the cost of the roads that we're building are not sustained by the individual units that are being built on it. And we have great public infrastructure already in the heart of the city. People like the Omaha Municipal Land Bank are doing good work to try to get some of those properties developed. But we would like to see more work done to encourage infill development over prioritizing this new development on the edge of the city. There's a number of problems that exist currently. The biggest one is that it's hard to build in the city. Infill projects are often more expensive. There's a lot more regulation that goes with that. There's a lot more sort of red tape. And so from a developer standpoint, the reason that they like to build on a new farm field is it's consistent. It's easy to do. There is a lot less sort of variability from site to site. Um, what we get as a result is we get people leaving the core of the city for these new homes in the suburbs, and it really hollows out the internal parts of the city. Um, it's also really difficult to build what we call the missing middle or medium density housing. These are duplexes, fourplexes, people converting a single family home to house multiple families, taking an existing home and putting something like an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, a backyard cottage or a tiny home. Those things are very difficult, if not impossible, based on current zoning. And that's something that we'd like to see as a way of increasing density without either having single family homes or on the other end of the spectrum, high rise condos or something that's much more capital intensive to do. Some of the solutions that we see are neighborhood grants. We really think that the neighborhoods themselves are the best indication or best know how to use a lot of these, how to develop these things. They know where the places that need to be developed are. There's a lot of restrictions on those accessory dwelling units. So, for example, how far away from the property lines things have to be built, whether or not you can have a place in your backyard that you rent out. We really have single family housing through most of the city. There are some parts where you can have multifamily units, but we'd like to see the elimination of single family zoning, and that's been done in a number of places, most notably recently Minnesota or Minneapolis in Minnesota has eliminated single family housing. That doesn't mean there aren't single family homes. It just means that I'm not absolutely constrained that a neighborhood that is single family homes can only be single family homes. It opens it up for duplexes, fourplexes, things like that that increase density and allow for the things that we really want, like more busing and biking options. There's also a lot of parking requirements. When you build a new site, there's a very rigid set of how many cars need to be able to park at that, particularly places like along the new Orbit bus line, where people may not need a car. People may be able to use only public transit. We'd like to see them reduce the need for public parking or parking requirements. And then last, the uses of the tax increment financing or TIF should really be used to encourage more affordable housing rather than building these giant projects that would probably happen anyhow. The most notable one of that is the new project Crossroads at 72nd and Dodge, which is just requested and it looks like will be approved for $80 million, the largest single use of TIF in the city's history. There are a number of wild ideas that we see in the city, things that probably would not get enough political support to happen, but would be a good idea generally. An easy one, just because of its location and the large land area, is to convert the golf course at Elmwood Park to a 9-hole course and use the additional space for housing, specifically multifamily or row house style housing. That could be used for UNO students, or it could be used for more affordable type housing in an already dense and growing part of the city. We'd also like to see TIF reduced, TIF mandate, so that we have more affordable housing as part of TIF. And then the sanitary improvement districts, or SIDs, or SIDs, those are the way that a lot of the new development is being financed. And that's really been a drain on the city, we think, long term. Here are a number of additional resources, and you can hyperlink once you have the presentation to, for example, how Minneapolis ended single family zoning, what an accessory dwelling unit is, and examples of what those look like. There's a lot of information around missing middle housing, which again is the type of housing between single family homes and high-rise apartments. And then understanding how we've designed this single family zoning in really a way to keep certain people out of neighborhoods. It's really designed to make it so that people are homogenous within their neighborhoods, so that people who make about the same amount of money live in the same neighborhood. And that has really sort of clustered us across the city rather than having different people living near you. So the next thing we're going to talk about is walking. Walking is the way we all begin and end most journeys. I say all, but people move through spaces, whether it's in a wheelchair, whether it's walking, whether it's in some other mobility device. At some point, you're not in a car. So we want to make sure that being able to get around under your own power is safe, is useful, is comfortable, and is interesting. Those 4 criteria really encourage people to get out and walk rather than getting in a car for every single trip. There are a number of current problems with our walking around the city. Big ones include the blank walls that we've built in the downtown. So for example, we've got a parking garage whose entire face, an entire city block, is really unappealing. No one would want to walk along there because there's nothing to see, there's nothing to do. It really is just a place you pass through. And the same goes for a number of different places where it's just surface parking. They're not great. People don't like to be there. It's not inviting. The places where people enjoy walking share certain things like the old market. The other thing is that sidewalks are not considered part of the transportation network. And as a result, there really isn't a fine or isn't a lot of enforcement around people parking across their sidewalk and obstructing it.
I'd also like to just quickly note, it's a weather dependent concern, but right now with the last big snowstorm, we have noticed a lot of shoveling issues. So I would just like to take a quick second to remind everyone, shovel your sidewalks and curb cuts, because that completely shuts down accessibility when there are snow and ice concerns, just as far as sidewalk obstructions. If you can't get to the sidewalk because the curb isn't accessible, even if your sidewalk is shoveled, it doesn't do enough good. So just a weather-related sidewalk note.
So there are a number of different possible solutions to this, one of which would be to designate the sidewalks part of the transportation network. We want to raise that up and say that yes, people do get around the city on the sidewalks. Um, Also requiring pedestrian access during construction. So if you go to a large city, you'll see this all the time. Maybe they'll take a lane of the road away from cars to allow people to walk in it. They'll barricade it off so it's safe. But if you have to close a sidewalk for construction, we really need a way for people to still access that space on foot rather than having to go across the street or go around the block, which is really not something people are going to do. The other thing is painting major crosswalks. Right now, we don't have crosswalk paints on most of our intersections. And then really being more vigilant around enforcing it, making sure that we're ticketing people who are parking their cars across the sidewalk, not removing snow in a timely manner, or if their sidewalk is in disrepair, trying to get those fixed and up to code as quickly as possible. A couple of wild ideas with sidewalk and walking is we could honestly close the old market to cars and open the entire space up to pedestrians. That would make a much more inviting environment. There's plenty of parking around the perimeter, and including that parking garage that was seen a couple slides ago. Along the same lines, one-way streets downtown really do work to encourage people to speed in that one direction because it gives them a multi-lane freeway. And that's more dangerous for people on foot because cars are traveling faster. So really reverting the downtown back to two-way streets, and then eliminating the beg button. And this is the button that you have to press in order to get the walk sign. We should really design it so that everybody is able to crosswalk when, in a regular cycle, that we shouldn't have to request the option of crossing the street.
Absolutely. And we're seeing not only the beg button elimination, but all of our quote unquote wild ideas really aren't that wild. We're seeing a lot of really interesting stuff, especially lately in response to COVID, being implemented throughout, well, the globe, frankly. But we are not seeing a lot of wild ideas, which I don't even, again, not to call them wild ideas, doable solutions, I think maybe would be another way to put it. But there are some simple things that really could be implemented pretty quickly, and we are seeing it done elsewhere. So we know it can be done. It's just the political will. So all of you candidates, can't wait to watch what you will do when you get in there.
And then some additional resources. Jeff Speck is an author, and he's been to Omaha a number of times. He's actually said that he won't return to Omaha because he's made several recommendations to the city that we have not taken up, specifically around travel lanes, the width of the road, things like that. But he's written 2 books, Walkable City Rules and Walkable City, How Downtown Can Save America. These books really give you insight to how you can make walking more desirable. And then Omaha by Design has great work done around complete streets and around what a good walkable space should be. So really just following the people who are already here doing the work.
Yeah, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to look at what's working elsewhere, see how we can tweak it to make it most appropriate for Omaha, and then turn the plans into action.
So public transit is another big part of the transportation network that we see a lot of room for growth within. The Orbit has been a really neat new project, and we want to see that grow and continue to be successful. But if you think about going to most major cities, you don't always need a car. You get off at the airport or however you arrived, and often you can use their transportation network to get around. That's not always the case in Omaha, and we'd like to see it where people can live a full and fulfilling life without a car in Omaha that's going to rely on public transit in addition to having walkable neighborhoods. So we really want to encourage people to not always use a car for many reasons. There's a number of problems with that currently. The big one is that Metro Omaha, the organization that runs the buses, isn't able to grow their budget at the same speed the city is growing. There's some bureaucratic constraints around that. Some of those have been changed with a recent proposal in the legislature that was passed last year by Senator Justin Wayne. But we need to actually implement those changes and do some things to make it so we have a regional planning authority. Buses are not super frequent. That's one of the big problems with not having a car, is you can't always just go to the bus stop and you know the next bus is on its way. If buses are running at 30-minute intervals and you miss a bus, you might really be late for whatever it is that you wanted to do. It drives people back to the car. Buses aren't necessarily intuitive in Omaha either. We've done a lot of work to make sure that we can serve the most number of people, that we can get the most area, but the buses don't necessarily run on the grid. It's not something that you just get on and go east-west or get on and go north-south and get near where you want to be. They have very specific, sometimes circuitous routes that they take, and that's for a number of reasons, but it means that you sort of have to indoctrinate yourself within the system to understand where this bus is going to go and if this bus will get you where you need to be. And also transfers cost money. So again, the idea that it shouldn't cost more money just because you want to travel on a diagonal rather than just traveling east-west or north-south. Buses get stuck in traffic. Buses are not faster. Buses are significantly slower currently. And that's because they're part of the traffic and they stop more. And then Orbit, which we all really enjoy and have been excited about, and a lot of us are out there championing Orbit. Right now, it's only serving a narrow number of people along Dodge.
Excitingly, with Metro, we just watched a new executive director come into town, Lauren Sensick. So I am hopeful that with some new leadership, we're going to see some good changes here. She actually is the one that wrote the Tiger grant that got us the funding to implement the Orbit system. So she is back, and I'm excited. And again, back to the frequency and the intuition that may be lacking with some of the work around buses. Orbit is doing some good things. So every 10 minutes for the majority of the runtime, certainly on weekdays, and you can see real-time tracking. So there are upgrades happening. And again, hopefully the Dodge Street line is just the first of many, but we have to ride it and we have to prove that it's successful in order for them to be able to justify more. So give it a shot. It's free through March as well, which is good.
So there's a number of different solutions that we could take. One is, as I mentioned before, the Regional Transportation Authority bill that was passed last year in the unicameral. Implementing that is going to be another challenge, and it means building another sort of governing body. But if we had a Regional Transportation Authority, it wouldn't necessarily have the same constraints that Metro has right now with funding. We've seen lots of cities improve the speed of their buses by getting cars out of the way. They create dedicated bus lanes along the Orbit route. It would not take a lot of imagination to see the center lane of Dodge become a bus-only Orbit line. And the only issue there is head-on-head Orbit buses. But beyond that, we can see if you could get on the Orbit and go significantly faster than the people who are in cars, it's going to drive more people onto the bus. And working with the airport to get more frequent bus service. Right now, there is really infrequent bus service to the airport. It's mostly for the people who work at the airport. It's not really designed for people who fly in or fly out. And cities have gone to removing fare for the buses. So one of the things that we've seen, Kansas City most notably, has removed the fee. We know from experience and from people's testimony that when you don't have that little bit of friction, the $1.25 that it costs to get on the bus, the 25 cents for a transfer, it really does make it easier to get on the bus knowing that you don't need to have exact change or this little bit of friction.
Yeah, and along those lines, just in general, what we've seen in other cities is when you incentivize ways to get around that are not so car centric, that's how you really see change. So disincentivizing getting in a car and driving everywhere, and really incentivizing with, again, fare reduction or just making it faster and more efficient. Like there's a lot of different ways to make it make more sense. And that will be, I think, what really could drive some change.
So one thing that gets passed around a lot, and this is a picture of Kansas City streetcar, is the streetcar. It's a really cool idea. I don't think anybody says that we shouldn't have a streetcar. It just doesn't function as transportation the way that people pushing it say that it will. It is definitely an economic development tool, and so if it wants to be seen in that light, the properties adjacent to any streetcar line will go up in value, and so there is the potential to capture some of that value and fund the streetcar through increased property value and the taxing that goes along with that. But we can look back to the city of Omaha circa 1940s and before and see a fairly robust streetcar network. And anytime they're resurfacing some of our major roads, you'll see those streetcar lines still in the road. We had a really nice streetcar network and we got rid of it. So people saying that the rails make it permanent, or the rails are the thing that will drive the development, that developers need to know that it's going to be there for years to come. We had a streetcar network and we took it out. So that's not always the good reason that people say it is. Our wild idea here is just more Orbit. Orbit has done a great job since its launch. Part of that is that it's free. Part of that is that it's new. But the biggest thing is that it's frequent and fast. Orbit has a number of advantages over cars, like queuing the lights, but it doesn't have all of the advantages that it could have, like dedicated bus lanes, and making it really faster to get from one place to another if that's the route that you chose to take. And we'd also like to see the Orbit expand to other north-south lines and really incorporating more of that style of transportation all over the city. There's some great, the book Better Buses, Better Cities is a great sort of primer on how buses, the humble bus, can make everything much nicer for the people who live there and the people who visit there. And then there's a link to Kansas City making the bus free for everybody. And that was really based on the strength of their streetcar, which was free from the beginning. And they saw huge numbers of people riding the streetcar, again, because it was free and that friction of paying was removed. Biking is another way that people get around the city. Believe it or not, hills, weather, people bike. So we have a number of different types of bicycle infrastructure. You may see a painted bike in the middle of a normal road. That's known as a sharrow. That's being phased out in the city, and instead you'll see a sign that designates it as a bike route. It'll give some wayfinding to other locations. You might see a painted bike lane, so a stripe along the side of the road with a bike inside of it. But what you don't see in Omaha, though it's been in the works for years, is a fully protected bike lane. A fully protected bike lane removes the bike traffic from the car traffic. It's not a sidewalk, it's its own sort of roadway that allows cyclists to travel without being afraid of the cars. That's really the number one impediment to people riding their bikes more frequently, is the fear of getting hit by someone driving a car. So the shared road or the painted bike lane really don't remove the cyclist from the car traffic in a way that makes most people feel safe.
And we really know that from, again, studies from elsewhere, that there's different types of people who are maybe interested in riding, totally terrified, never going to ride. People maybe like Derek and I who ride year round no matter what. But what we see when we make real efforts at a connected and protected bike lane network is those people that are like maybe bike curious are going to turn into commuters more regularly when they feel safe. So I think the safety element really cannot be overstated. And yeah, we've been, like you just said, Derek, talking about particularly Harney Street. There's been a cycle track project in the works for years that is just being talked about and talked about. They're saying at this point, maybe 2021, maybe this year, it'll happen. I will believe it when I'm riding in it. But again, can't overstate the importance of safety and a truly protected bike lane with physical, not just a stripe of paint or an extra stripe of paint. Sometimes you'll see what they call as a buffered bike lane. What that can do is really just put a second stripe of paint. That does, again, nothing for safety. Visible barrier is not the same as a physical barrier, and that's what we need. I could talk way too much about bikes, but I will stop for a minute.
Yeah, and we'll talk about a number of different ways to sort of achieve that separated bike lane, and they don't all involve building a second curb like we saw in that photo. That photo, by the way, comes from N Street in Lincoln, which is the only protected bike lane, or protected bike lane that I know of in the state. There's a lot of problems with biking infrastructure right now. One of them that we fought and worked with city councilmen last year is people were parking in the bike lane, and there really wasn't any enforcement around people parking in bike lanes when it was convenient for them. We don't have any protected bike infrastructure that's fully protected, removing people other than the trail system. But the trail system really isn't part of the larger transportation system. The trails are nice for recreation, but they are sort of the abutment to a stream or creek. They are extra space that needed to be accessed by machinery anyway, so it made sense to put a wide trail along it, but they didn't connect important places to other important places. And that's really what we need to be able to do to get around the city. To be somebody who lives without a car and only uses a bike, you need to be able to get where you want to be on your bike. Once you get west of 72nd Street, the grid system falls apart. So east of 72nd, there's often a busy road and then a road just off of that busy road that is easier to ride on. That stops existing once we get on the other side of 72nd. There's a number of things that we could do there to just connect the neighborhoods in ways that would connect cyclists and pedestrians without connecting it for cars. And then really regressive policies that have been aggressively sort of anti-bike that we've seen in recent years, specifically the removal of an on-street bike corral in Benson that was turned over for one car parking spot. Sarah could say more on that. So there's a number of possible solutions. The biggest one is we just need bike infrastructure around the city. There needs to be a safe place to be on your bike that gets you from where you live to where you want to be, where you work, where you shop, where you go for fun. We really need to encourage people to get out on electric bikes. If you've not tried an electric bike, there's a large percentage of the fleet of the B-Cycle rentable bikes are electric. They're a lot of fun. They make the hills a lot easier. They make it a lot more accessible for people to get around the city on bike, who aren't necessarily year-round commuters, people who are going out for long rides. These are just people getting around really for a purpose. We used to have a bike pedestrian coordinator. We'd like to see that position return, just because we need somebody in the city level who is really focused on the needs of the bike and the pedestrian community. And then starting to treat cycling as transportation. It's been said by city officials that we're a car city, and they're just don't take the people on bikes seriously as transportation.
Yeah,
so,
I think, sorry, quickly, just kind of the shift in thinking, like we say with mode shift so much, we just need to really start looking at bikes as part of the transportation network. And right now they're seen as sport or recreation. And I really just think until there is some top-down leadership that is going to say, you know what, look at how great biking is for businesses. You want to talk about road maintenance, it's a lot less it's a lot more cost effective to not have everyone traveling in a several thousand-pound box on wheels. Like, let's incentivize people getting out of their cars and onto bikes. Not, I was accused once from Tom Becca, I believe, of trying to take the car keys out of everyone's hands. That's not at all what we're doing. We are encouraging people to look at the way they move around the city differently and trying to figure out ways to allow those people who are curious about using other mode options and just encouraging that. I don't know.
Absolutely. So we talked about the Harney Street cycle track. This has been in the works for years. This is something that is very doable. It's something that we could see and really pilot and prove that people will bike if they're given a chance to do so safely. So we really want to get going on that. And the biggest thing about a cycle network is it needs to be a network. You can't act like people are going to use these sort of there's a bit of a bike lane here, and there's a bit of a bike lane here, and there's a trail over there. If they're not connected, then they don't really serve the purpose of transportation. It would be the same if a number of our streets just didn't connect. If you just couldn't get through on them, then people wouldn't travel by car. It really needs to be something that you can get from where you live or where you work to where you want to be. A number of ways to do that. The photo there is an example of a protected bike lane where they use parking rather than a physical curb. So a row of parked cars. This works really well in a downtown context where people want to park on the street anyway. You just move those parked cars away from the curb and you give room for a cycle track between the parked cars and the curb. There's a number of different things that you can look at there, looking at what different types of infrastructure we do have around the city, understanding how road diets work, and I've linked to the Metro bike map referenced earlier. So streets and roads are another major part of our community. One of the things that we often have to bring to people's attention is this idea of induced demand. So right now, one of the primary ways of improving a road is to make it wider. That does make traffic, it does reduce traffic for a while, but it inevitably means that more cars are going to drive at peak hours and the traffic will be right back to where it was before the road widening. Because roads are a free good, there's no incentive for people not to use them unless it's busy and unless there is some disincentive. So we don't want to build more roads because roads are very expensive to build and maintain. We want ways of reducing the number of lane miles in the city, and understanding that if we do widen roads, it won't actually solve any of our traffic needs. We've seen a number of places in the city, I guess most notably recently, we saw it on 30th Street, where we've done what's known as a road diet. So the most common road diet is you take a 4-lane road, 2 lanes in either direction, and you turn it into a 3-lane road with a center turn lane. That means that cars aren't speeding past one another, sort of jockeying for position. It means that the cars that are turning left don't have to stop the traffic behind them to do so. The 4-lane roads are really one of the most dangerous types of roads. And so moving it to a 3-lane road usually does not reduce the number of cars that can pass through on a given day, because again, people turning left have to fully stop traffic behind them. But it does give extra room for a bike lane on either side, or it could be a fully protected cycle track. We have this idea of complete streets, that a street is for everybody, and Omaha itself actually has a award-winning complete streets policy, but it's not always implemented. So complete streets are designed so that anybody can use the streets, whether you're biking, whether you're using a bus, whether you're walking, or if you're in a car. We are not trying to eliminate cars, and cars will always be part of the transportation network in Omaha, but we just don't want them to be the only way of getting around the city. The city's budget, a lot of it goes to maintaining the roads that we have, and we use a lot of new bonded money to build new roads. So we spend a lot of money both building new roads and maintaining the roads that we currently have. If you've ever complained about a pothole, we are way behind in resurfacing, and that has to do with the amount of money that it costs to repair the approximately 5,000 lane miles of streets in Omaha. If we could reduce the number of lanes, that would reduce the sort of long-term burden or expectation that we have to fix these roads, and would make them better roads with the same amount of money. There's a number of solutions to this. One of them is to work to reduce minimum lane widths. So how wide a travel lane is has to do with how fast you feel comfortable driving on it. Right now, 11-foot lanes are the minimum allowed in the state. We'd like to see people at the city and state level work to reduce that, to allow municipalities to choose how wide the roads should be based on the context. Once that is no longer the state requirement, we'd like to see more roads sort of made less wide That has a lot to do with the cost of maintaining them, but it also has a lot to do with the speed that people will drive on them. We'd like to see an end to the road widening projects that are happening. If you go to the Keep Omaha Moving website and look at the projects, most of them are widening roads, taking a 2-lane road and moving it to a 4-lane road, taking a 3-lane road and moving it to a 5-lane road. These again will solve some traffic congestion in the near term. They will not solve it long term, and they will increase the amount of debt that we require to sort of fix these roads going forward. So it's adding to the liability of the city's finances. We also have a really good complete streets policy, as I mentioned. Make it mandatory. Right now, most streets just don't follow it. They're not required to. We have this thing, it looks really good on paper, but we don't actually follow it. An example of that is there's a policy that parking garages should have street level shops. Recently, the Kiewit building at sort of North Downtown asked to not do that. They don't want to be landlords. They don't want to have to worry about tenants and being in that business. So of course they don't really want to have a ground floor retail as part of their parking garage. But it means that they've created a city block worth of sidewalk that no one really wants to walk on. There's nothing to go there for. They create a dead zone. Make those things mandatory and stop giving companies sort of an out when they just don't want to do it. So a number of wild ideas with this, but the easiest one to do that we should just do immediately would be to tear down I-480 through the downtown. There is acres worth of developable land that is beneath that interstate that we could turn into something much more productive for the city, much more inviting for pedestrians and cyclists, much more just delightful to be in than the current overpass interstate parking underneath gross area that we have that separates Creighton from the downtown, that separates the event center from the downtown, that separates the baseball stadium from the downtown. It really creates a hard barrier. And another hard barrier that has been created, and this one is really running into the end of its useful life, is the Doubletree on 16th Street that was designed to cut off North 16th from South 16th and did a great job. North 16th Street has withered and died. And a lot of that is because the Doubletree went up as a literal wall to cut off North Omaha from the downtown.
We keep talking about connectivity, and this is, a perfect example of how we need to improve and address connectivity, not just via car, but just networks of walkable, bikeable places. And this, maybe it is a wild idea, but it is something that should be considered.
So there's lots of additional resources with this. The Freeways Without Future from the Congress of New Urbanism looks at freeways that really aren't serving a great purpose, that have been torn down or could be torn down. Interstate 480 is really a prime contender for that, especially in the downtown bit. Looking back at complete streets and then really just designing a street so that it's not only for cars. And then the last bit that we have to talk about is safety and enforcement. And this has been in the headlines certainly over the last couple of years with traffic stops and with other issues involving the police. But the idea of Vision Zero is the idea that nobody should die in road deaths. So every year there is a goal set of how many people are going to die. And the goal is really just a statistical number of how many people we think will die, in car crashes, in people who are walking that get struck by vehicles, people who are biking that get struck by vehicles. These are just sort of statistical numbers that actuaries come up with, but there is a goal number each year. And Vision Zero says that goal should be zero. Our goal should be 0 deaths due to car traffic. The way that we get there is by slowing down cars and making it harder for a car to not see somebody, making it so that if there are crashes, that those crashes are non-fatal. We know that we can do that by reducing speeds and by increasing visibility. So there's this idea of a design speed, that every road has a speed that people feel comfortable driving. that doesn't always conform to the speed limit. The speed limit is what we enforce or theoretically enforce, but the design speed is what people who are driving on that road feel comfortable driving. Um, Most of the time, the design speed is higher than the posted speed limit, and as a result, people speed.
Yes, design is definitely more important and effective than traditional policing enforcement, we also know. One quick note too about Vision Zero, Omaha just hired a Vision Zero coordinator, which I think Mode Shift Omaha should take a little bit of credit for. We brought up the concept years ago after multiple crashes on 52nd and Radial, and had a press conference and little rally and all that good stuff. And so yeah, as of I think 2 weeks ago, Omaha has its first Vision Zero coordinator. So thank you, City of Omaha, for taking this need seriously and taking some action around it. I can't wait to meet, I believe his name's Jeff Subject. And yeah, we are excited to see what he can come up with. You're muted.
So the other issue around the speed that people drive is enforcement. We've kind of created a system where people are by default breaking the law. It's easy for the police to find a reason to pull somebody over, and this has been used there's a Kansas City preventative patrol that came out in the 70s. This Kansas City style of policing is kind of the broken windows style of policing. The idea that you just pull over everybody and see what you find. It used frequent traffic stops to reduce crime, but it's also built a really contentious relationship between citizens and the police. And it's also not implemented fairly. We know that there are biases in the police. We know there's biases in most people, and that we are seeing that play out with traffic stops and who gets pulled over. And we would like to see the road design enforce the law rather than the police. Police should always be there to pull over the people who are doing criminally negligent things, people who are driving well over the speed limit. But for the most part, the road itself should indicate to the people on it what the appropriate speed is. If it's a highly residential road, it should be really hard to drive fast on it. It should not feel comfortable to drive fast on it. And by doing that, we can reduce the need for police enforcement. People make rational choices. There's lots of places where people are going to choose the easy way or the way that makes the most sense to them, whether or not that is the way that the city or the designers have set it up. So we see this all the time, things like desire paths. The desire path is a cut across in the grass where people don't want to take a hard 90-degree turn at a corner, or they want to get from A to B and they just cross the easiest way that makes sense. We see this manifest in weird ways. So if a place closes, or if you see a lot that is filled with tires or mattresses and appliances, that really is an indication that there's not a good way for people in that neighborhood to get rid of their tires, mattresses, or appliances. The city should have a method of picking up those bulky items rather than making people take it to the dump. People are going to just dump it in a nearby abandoned lot. And that has a drain on the community and it has a drain on the city. And when we see those things, we should react not by criminalizing the people doing it, but by realizing that this is an opportunity for us to make their lives easier by providing recycling, by providing trash removal, things like that. Here's an example.
Sorry, I just want to say really quickly, part of that comes from listening to your community. I think a lot of times what frustrates us in Omaha is that, despite the fact that we have studies proving that economically or whatever data needs to back it up, that exists. We have people begging for certain things. There's not a lack of communication coming from citizens to the city. It's just sometimes a lack of taking action once we have heard it. So please, if you are elected, listen to your communities. And now listen to my dogs. I'm going to mute, but that's all.
So here's a prime example of that. This is the intersection of Lafayette and Saddle Creek and Northwest Radial. Sort of three roads come together at once. There's a whole neighborhood and some businesses over here, an apartment building that live off of Lafayette. And when they get to Northwest Radial, the only option for them to do is to turn right. But often that's not what they want to do. They'll sometimes make a U-turn and turn left and get onto Saddle Creek, going up towards the Homie Inn and Sergeant Pfeffer's, that area. Um, I know this is an issue because I've seen people do this, but I also know that the city knows that this is an issue because at this intersection, there are 4 signs telling people that they need to turn right. All traffic must turn right, no left turns. So rather than designing 4 signs and ignoring the underlying problem, something else could be done here to connect that street with Saddle Creek in a way that makes it so that people don't have to break the law or do something dangerous to go where they want to go. And these little types of things that make the city better are where we really want our public officials to listen to the lived experiences of the people out there every day, rather than just putting up another sign or sort of top down looking at the city on a map and saying, this will work. We know where it's not working, and we know that we can listen to our citizens and make it better.
Totally. The people who are using it mostly know the best, well, maybe not the best solution, but they will give you plenty of feedback on the way that it is being used in actuality. And teamwork to come up with a solution would be pretty exciting.
Yeah, so we think that the best solution to these is to design roads and design places such that it is self-enforcing for the speed limit, that people will know the appropriate speed to go. And that can be done by narrowing the roadway. It can be done by creating bulb outs at turns, reducing that radius of a turn so that it's not easy to take a right hand or a left hand turn at full speed, that you really do need to slow down before making that turn. We know that that's going to reduce the chance that you turn into somebody who is walking across the street or somebody that you just didn't see. Doing a better job with paint, painting stop bars and painting crosswalks really give indication of where we expect to see people. That gives cars more understanding of where they need to be on heightened alert. The drivers of those cars know that there might be somebody walking across the street if we've painted that crosswalk. Otherwise, they miss that entirely. Other things that we can do to sort of reduce that dangerous moment of encounters with police, things like red light cameras or automated speed cameras. Some of this can be done automatically without the need to bring police enforcement into it. So self-enforcing and automatic enforcement are things that we could do to really improve safety, but also to not have those sort of confrontational moments with the police. The last thing is giving more authority to neighborhood and community groups. So if we could do neighborhood grants, or if local groups could sort of drive what the development looked like for their neighborhood, there'd be a lot more attention to what the lived experience is of the people in that community, rather than just assuming that we know what will work for the people that are there. Lots of resources around that. Looking at Minneapolis again and the speed limits that they've done, they've mandated a citywide 20-mile-an-hour speed limit unless otherwise noted. So all of the residential neighborhoods, or the majority of the residential neighborhoods, have gone down to 20 miles an hour. There's a lot of information around Vision Zero. This is not something that we invented. It's something that is well researched, and we know how to make safe streets. It's just a matter of understanding that a safe street is often a slow street for cars, and that will increase the amount of time that somebody is driving from point A to point B. But we think that the savings in human life is worth the slight delay in somebody's commute. There's a lot of information from Strong Towns specifically on how building more roads has really driven a lot of cities into insolvency, that we have more liability than we have capital, that the cost to replace or repair our roads is greater than the taxable land that we have adjacent to those roads, and things about suburban development making cities poorer. Like I said earlier, developers like to develop on the edge of town because it's consistent, not because it's the place that people want to live. People want to live where they can. They will take those homes because they are available, but they would prefer to live closer to their job, closer to their places of recreation, worship, closer to the places that they want to be. So the idea that people want suburban options is really just that that's all we've given them for the past 40 years. There's lots of information about slowing down traffic and really good information about how the police have how the police have been used sort of inconsistently in making it safe for people. I don't know the right word about that.
There's a lot of words about policing and enforcement that I will save for right now. But yeah, just I think the main takeaway with that is we don't need to rely heavily on the police if we design it right in the first place.
So the last thing that we want to do is we want to reach out and be a resource for any candidates running or anybody that's interested in this. We have monthly membership meetings with ModeShift. We'd also like to have all of the people running for office to one of our coffee chats or member meetings. And then use this as a resource. We've been thinking a lot about this for a long time, and we want to sort of share what we know and share what we've seen of the city with people who hope to run the city. And we wish you all the best.
Yes, thanks for joining us. And like Derek said, the coffee chats starting this month, January 15th is the next one. But we are going to be having coffee chats the third Friday of every month at 8 a.m. virtually. So we will be talking with our city council representative or candidates, hopeful representatives at those coffee chats. And then the membership meetings for the next few months, we're going to be inviting mayoral candidates. So plenty of ways to get involved. And as Derek said, yes, please rely on your friendly ModeShift nerds for any type of mobility questions you may have. We're really excited to share this with you and looking forward to feedback and answering further questions. Oh, and become a member, become a member, become a member. Go to modeshiftomaha.org, and then you will be able to look at the different types of membership. And yeah, we hope we can count on you for some support.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Thank you all for watching.